Hello friends, and welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast, where we explore the kind of thinking that can help us navigate a positive way forward. I'm your host, Morag, permaculture educator and global ambassador, filmmaker, eco-villager, author, food forester, mother, practivist, and all-round lover of thinking, communicating and acting regeneratively. Unprecedented changes are happening all around us. So how do we make sense of this? To know which way to turn, to know what action to focus on, so our efforts are working towards resilience, regeneration and reconnection. What better way to make sense than to join together with others in open, generative conversation? Each week, I speak with a wonderful guest who inspires and challenges me with their ways of thinking. These thinkers, doers, educators, activists, scholars, writers, leaders, farmers are people whose work informs permaculture and sparks the imagination of what a post-COVID, climate-resilient, regenerative and socially just future could look like. Their way of seeing helps us to compost and digest ideas and nurture the fertile ground for new ideas. Together, we'll open conversations around permaculture design, regenerative thinking, community action, earth repair, and eco-literacy. This podcast is brought to you by the Permaculture Educators Program of the Permaculture Education Institute. This is an online dual permaculture design and teacher certificate program designed to help you make permaculture your life and your livelihood too, and to help you ripple out permaculture thinking and action in your world and beyond. Last week, I uploaded a little introduction to this Sense Making in a Changing World podcast. And this episode is our first episode with our guest, and I'm speaking with a young regenerative farmer and author, Acadia Tucker from New Hampshire in the USA. If you've not already seen her books, I sincerely encourage you to check them out. They are called Action for Citizen Gardeners Everywhere. Her two books are Growing Good Food, A Citizen's Guide to Backyard Carbon Farming, and Growing Perennial Foods, a field guide to raising resilient fruits, herbs and vegetables. I was so delighted to recently catch up with Acadia via Zoom and have this wonderful chat, and I'm really delighted to be sharing it with you here today. Hey, congratulations on your book. Books.
Thank you.
Absolutely amazing.
I think that this idea of a victory garden, growing food at home in whatever space that you have is one of the best things you can do right now, amongst this pandemic. And it has a twofold power. One, it helps you build your community's, food security, your personal food security, your community's food security. But on the other hand, it also lets you cultivate something really beautiful that you can control more or less in these times of immense stress and confusion.
Yeah, fantastic. So how are you anyway? I mean, how are you going? Are you in the middle of crisis where you are, or are you a little bit on the outskirts of things?
No, I do live in a pretty rural area, but we're still, I have so much going on. So, just because this happens correlates just in time with spring. So this is the time where we're moving and grooving. And, if we just halted now, come August, we'd see some really big repercussions. So we're trying to carry on as normal, although we have a number of restrictions, put in place, the social distancing, that have made things more challenging. There's also been some seed shortages that have been of concern. Seed companies are inundated with orders, so things have been getting slow to get to us. Compost is selling off the shelves. Kind of the same panic buy with the toilet paper mentality is happening a lot with some of the gardening supplies. So that's been interesting, and trying to stay ahead of all of that takes up a lot of time.
Yeah. So what are you growing mostly where you are? So tell us a little bit about just where you are right now and what you're doing too.
So I live in Maine, and my main business at the moment is growing hops. So those are those bitter pine cone looking things that you make beer out of. But I also have a really extensive personal garden, which I grow food for my family with. So at the moment, I converted a bedroom in my house into a seed growing room. It's all lit up with grow lights. Seedlings are popping up everywhere. So this is my favorite time of the year.
Yeah,
no
fantastic.
doubts about it.
Yeah. So you're supplying the hops to a local brewery or a group of, like, how does it work? Your farm?
So we supply hops in two ways. One we call wet hops, which is freshly picked off the plant, and then we also do dry hops, which kind of in like a pelletized form. So we supply a lot of the breweries here in Portland, Maine, and Portland, Maine's one of those hot spots for the craft brewery scene popping up. So in general, we have more business than we can meet, which is a good problem to have.
Absolutely. That's amazing. So tell us about the farm that you ran before, where you had something like 200 varieties, I read, that you were growing there.
Yeah, so what got me interested in farming was just after graduation. I had this opportunity to kind of transform an old derelict plant nursery into what we call an organic market garden. So it's small space, but very high intensity. And what that allows you to do is experiment with all of these fun different things. So we had fruit trees, berry bushes, vegetables, herbs, flowers, kind of all packed into this 2-acre space. And it was very challenging to begin with. Graduating college, you're not really sure what you're getting yourself into, especially having no experience whatsoever. So it's a very steep learning curve. But over the course of 6 years, we developed into a very strong hold in the community. We offered CSAs. We supplied our local restaurants. We had a weekend farm stand, and it really became the cornerstone of the community, which is really nice.
Fantastic. So how are farms being affected right now? We're in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis while we're speaking. And I know here some of the farms are really struggling because the small farms, because they're often going direct to restaurants, cafes.
Yeah.
The ones that are supplying into community-supported agriculture systems seem to be okay because they've got that direct market to consumers, although getting the transportation to consumers in the cities seems to be a little bit more challenging. But how are they going where you are? Are you also finding that that's the case, or?
Yeah, like you said, farms that have a very strong CSA customer base seem to be doing okay. It's pretty devastating because for the last 5 to 10 years, small farms have been establishing this relationship with restaurants, schools, hospitals, to get fresh food directly to these places. Yes. And all of a sudden they cut the cord. And there's, there are some, especially down south right now when it's, harvest season starting, a lot of food's laying waste in the fields. The second problem that maybe larger scale farms are having is just a labor shortage. Yes. Some of the borders are cut off, travel has stopped. We can't get the influx of help that we normally receive this time of year, and that's been pretty devastating as well.
Gosh, I don't even thought about the schools because that's something different. We don't have school lunches like you do there. That's a huge impact, isn't it, as well? Hospitals,
yeah, hotels, kind of everything that's supported this infrastructure of this farm to table relationship. All of a sudden just came to a grinding halt. So everything that farmers have been amping up, maybe they grew more tomatoes or grew more lettuce to supply these things, it has nowhere to go. And that's met at the same time where we're having hunger shortages. People aren't having access to food. So there's kind of this unevenness where there's too much food some places and not enough food others. Yeah.
So that really kind of, it's highlighted the vulnerability of our system, hasn't it? And even when we think that we're strengthening it with the local food systems, that still the distances makes it challenging, doesn't it? Which brings us to really the concept of the gardens at home and local gardens in the community, which you've been writing about. But before we go to that, I really wanted to learn a little bit more about what got you started in this plant journey. I mean, you seem to have an absolute love of plants, and you've gone down into the Peruvian rainforest exploring it. Like, where did that all come from? What inspired you to dive into plants so deeply and beautifully?
Yeah, I've always been a little bit, growing up, a little bit of that kind of wild child, would kind of disappear into the woods for the day and come back when dinner was ready. So I think it started there. I was always been fascinated by the natural world around me. I always wanted to understand it better. I always wanted to feel a part of it. I feel like there's this disconnect between people and nature. So even as a young child, that was very important to me. And then when I went to school, I studied biology and ecology very intensely, and that kind of led me to do these really interesting research trips. I studied native plants in the Channel Islands off the coast of California, seeing how they responded to kind of these abnormal disturbances that they weren't used to. And that led me to the rainforest, where I studied tree species, which is there's thousands and thousands of tree species that don't even have names in the rainforest, just because there's so many of them. We haven't gotten there yet. So it's twofold. It's my love for nature, but also my love to kind of figure things out. I like the challenge. I like that when you're growing, if you mess up one season, you always have next season to try something different. And it kind of, from that scientific trial and error aspect of it, has always kept me coming back. And through the years of doing this, it's given me that knowledge base of what we're seeing now. I can write about in books. It's very important for me to try to share the information that I have, because it doesn't do much good stuck in my brain.
And thank you for doing that.
It's genuinely been this lifelong journey of just kind of putting one foot in front of the other, and it just leading me to where I am now.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing it. And so tell me a little bit more about, so you wrote a book about perennials. Perennials is one of my absolute loves too in the garden. So if you could share with us a little bit about why you see a perennial food garden as being a really important type of garden, as opposed to the standard veggie garden that we have in our minds that's, lots of annuals and beds and things. So describe what your garden is like a bit, and how perennials play a role in that.
Yeah, I think it all boils down to soil health. I went to school, got my master's in soil science to try to help me with this pursuit of knowledge and to better my, my agricultural skills. And when I was at school, I learned that soil holds so much power. It can help mitigate climate change. It helps support plants. It really is the foundation for a healthy world. And perennials play perfectly into that. Part of the reason I love them is because you plant them once and they keep coming back. I mean, what's more amazing than that? So what that does is it minimizes soil disturbance so that it can stay healthy or build up that really important organic matter over time without you ripping out the plant, throwing it in your compost pile, tilling it the next year and replanting. You kind of pop it in once and you can leave it alone. The other things that I love about perennials is that they just come back on their own every year. You don't have to replant. It'll be a cold spring day. I'll go out into the garden and you'll see new shoots popping up, and you don't have to lift a finger. So that alone is miraculous.
It is, isn't it? It's absolutely wonderful. And similarly here, we had this really big drought last year, and all of our gardens were decimated pretty much. There was all the trees almost looked like they're about to die. Then all of a sudden we got some rains, and then whoop, up popped the garden again. Even after, so whether it be after the cold or after the dry or whatever it might be, there's always something that's re-emerging.
Exactly. Yeah, they can be a bit more resilient than our annuals. And part of the reason is because they actually allocate nutrients and water a little bit differently than annuals. Since they know they're kind of in it for the long haul, they're a little bit more conservative, where annuals tend to guzzle everything up if they find it. Perennials use what they need.
Yeah.
Which is pretty beautiful.
That's really, really important thing to keep in mind, isn't it? And particularly when we're having, these difficult challenges and that happen from drought to flood to all different sorts of things that are going on in the world, and that, often these plants, maybe a lot of the food parts of it too are underground as well. So even, some of the places I know where they get cyclones, so at least, the cyclone won't happen, but still all the food is there under the ground, and then things will re-sprout again. So it
re-sprout from the roots, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, what are the sorts of perennial foods that you rely on in Maine?
Maine can be a bit challenging. So living in Washington for the last 10 years, it was a lot more mild. a lot more temperate. I could certainly grow and overwinter a lot more things than when I moved back home about 2.5 years ago. I had to reintroduce myself to how bitterly cold Maine was in the winter. So one of my all-time favorites is definitely asparagus, because they're coming up right now, and that's kind of your first taste of something fresh in the spring, along with some things like sorrel. There's some wild arugula that's popping up right now. There's these onion-like things called ramps, which I love. But then I also love, I love apple trees, and this is kind of the apple tree mecca. So being able to experiment with different apple varieties, going to these, we have such old farms, 250 years old. So you'll be walking in the woods and you'll come upon this really old apple tree, which is just amazing to see.
Yeah, we don't have apples here. Like, my son keeps asking me, can we go and live in a place where we can grow apples? We can't grow apples or apricots or anything like that. And we can grow.
It was really interesting reading the magazine you sent me, seeing the different foods you had highlighted in it. Some I had never heard of before.
No, this, because I grew up in a more I grew up in the south of Australia, and it's sort of more temperate climate there, and even sort of slightly Mediterranean. So it was sort of the dry hot summers, and then the cool winters. And up here it's all the wet hot summers and the sort of the drier cool winters. And so it's all a completely different upside down way. But I've been up here for about 20 odd years now, and so I think I kind of cracked the subtropical kind of thinking. And but I'm always learning more, and always sort of looking to different cultures and places where because a lot of the knowledge about growing food in this climate, and in each climate, is often part of this really long oral tradition.
Absolutely,
and which parts of the plants to eat, and how to make use of all different interesting things. And even, I'm really fascinated too about exploring Indigenous foods. And I wonder whether there's any, like, what are the Indigenous foods in your part of the world that people who lived there, before colonization would rely on?
Yeah, no, it's a little embarrassing because I don't have the best answer for this question. But I do know that fruit trees, berry bushes, we have tons of blackberries, raspberries, boysenberries, huckleberries. We have tons and tons of berries. The ramps I mentioned are native. There's all sorts. The woods are just filled with mushrooms and edible flowers. And it really is a wealth of knowledge that's something that I personally would like to learn more about as well. And I think incorporating these native foods into your garden is just another step of making it that much more resilient.
Yeah, and also more for that, as a habitat garden as well.
Absolutely. Pollinators, even, I know we have a big deer problem out here. So we don't necessarily want to welcome in all the animals, but we at least want to make sure that, we're allowing them to coexist with us.
Yeah. We have lots of kangaroos and wallabies all the way through our garden.
I can't imagine what a kangaroo does to a garden.
Actually, that I welcome the kangaroos, because what they do is they go around the edge and they just nibble the grassy bits, and then it's
whackers.
Yeah, look, I really like them, and the wallabies do a really nice job. They come along the edge of the terraces and just nibble the edges of the sweet potato, so they kind of neaten it off for me. So but I've designed the garden to that the flow of those animals actually does the work, as opposed to them just coming in. But yeah, we do have wild deer as well, and I know how challenging that can be with fruit trees and things. But
they just take big bites. They don't like to share.
I used to have these really nice citrus trees that were full, and then they gradually got sort of taller and thinner and thinner. And
the vase shape.
So tell me a bit more about gardening as activism and the whole climate victory garden idea that you've been writing about.
Sure. So the idea of a victory garden stems from kind of the World War I, World War II era, where, you know, a lot of the men were shipped overseas to help fight the war. And then a lot of the trains and cargo and means of transporting food around the country were now used for ammunitions and, you know, transporting troops. So it became really important for people at home to start growing their own food to kind of free up those resources that were needed, you know, to win this war. So by the height of World War II, in the early 40s, we had over 20 million victory gardens growing about 40% of the nation's food, which
20
is just
million.
an enormous accomplishment. So people were using, you know, it could be as small as pots on your deck or a rooftop or, you know, any patch of dirt that people could find, they were starting to plant in to help with this effort. And now I see, you know, a need for that again. But in this time, instead of fighting the war, it's a really good fight against climate change, because growing food and growing plants actually helps to sequester carbon, which means just pulling that out of the air and storing it underground. So the idea of a climate victory garden is that same mentality where you want to mobilize the citizens, mobilize everybody, come together for this kind of common good. We've kind of coined the term citizen gardener, you know, growing for the better good, growing for your community. And it's, I think it can be very powerful. And I think it's becoming, amongst this pandemic, a lot more powerful. People are using this as a means to build community, build food solidarity, kind of all of these things. And then it has this great side benefit of drawing down carbon. So to me, it's kind of this perfect encompassment of you know, why everybody today should go out and start growing food.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes absolute sense, from whether it be from the ecological perspective, the global climate crisis, but also from the global pandemic. But what you said before about the climate gardens and the 20 million gardens, I'm interested do you know, like, how did it get to that point of having so many? What support, what was behind it that spread it so widely? Was there government support or something that helped people do it, or was it just from the spirit of the people that rippled this out? And what can we learn from that to help ripple out climate victory gardens as widely as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think every time there's a crisis, there's always great opportunity. So when you have something like a war that's right in front of your face, this is what I can do today to help that. I think with climate change, it's so far in the future. It's distant. It's hard to grasp. It's hard to wrap your head around. So I feel like it's easy to put on the side burners. But to answer your question, the original Victory Gardens, they did have a lot of government support. The government wasn't necessarily, giving everybody seeds and giving everybody soil, but there was a lot of advertisement, slogans, kind of this, patriotism is, I think, what a lot drove that to be as successful as it was. And I'm feeling that very same feeling now, now more than ever. As a global community, we're kind of banding together, we're all staying inside, not necessarily, I'm a young person, not necessarily for my health, but for my grandfathers or your grandfathers. And we're already seeing that sense of community commitment and that kind of upswell that I think pairs really well with a movement like planting climate victory gardens.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really looking at, care of community, care of family, and care of self, isn't it?
It's something bigger than yourself, that you can get behind and rally with.
Yeah. So can you tell me some stories of some of the climate victory gardens that you know of that, what's happening on the ground with the climate victory garden movement, and who are the citizen gardeners that you're seeing emerge? What's kind of happening on the ground in response to what you're putting out in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think right now there's, everybody from experienced gardeners to never stuck a shovel in the ground before are really being motivated by the current global situation to start growing food. So one of the things I've been seeing is, people who have established gardens are either increasing the size of their garden, maybe thinking about growing for more than just their family, but maybe their neighbor. So that's been really cool. But the kind of the awe-inspiring thing is seeing all of these novice gardeners, never even maybe have been interested in growing food, are now all of a sudden kind of, empowered to start doing this. And that's what I think we can gain the most out of this, is getting, maybe my books weren't enough to motivate them to start growing food, but a pandemic certainly is. So that's, why we're seeing things like seeds go off the shelves and, people buying garden tools and soil and all of these things. So I've seen, I've been on the phone with family members, they've never planted a garden, asking me, where do I start? So it's just this big groundswell that's been happening. And I just really hope that even when this all kind of passes, that people still kind of hold on to that sentiment and that energy to keep it going.
Yeah. Do you know, I think some people will stop, but I think there'll be a really big proportion of people that keep it on, because it feels like we've upset, we haven't, but the situation has upset our sense of balance and security, and that something about a garden gives us a real sense of security. When all the things around us that we realize that we actually have no control over, what we can actually control and manage is how we meet our basic needs using the spaces that we have around us or in our neighbourhoods to actually look after community and family. And
absolutely.
I think
and to get to go outside.
Yes, yeah. So I think
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think that we are in the midst of a cultural shift. And I think it's really interesting to really look at how we can explore that as gardeners, as farmers, as permaculture people, as anyone who's involved in the regenerative farming and particularly gardening movement can talk more out in the community. I mean, you're doing that through your books, and I do that through things like the YouTube. And what other ways are you finding that you're communicating out about your climate gardening?
So, I mean, being in this very virtual world, a lot of it is over the phone, over the computer.
Yeah.
So most of the direct contact, comes to my family. And it's been very interesting because my whole family's always been very supportive of what I do, but they've never been as involved. And now I have my whole family calling me up, wanting to plant a garden, wanting to, just run ideas past me. And that's been really, it's been really nice. It's made me feel useful. But I think also too, there's pictures, there's social media, there's all of these outlets that are kind of being used to their maximum capacity at the moment. And it's been really interesting to see how that's shifted. Instead of silly dog memes on my Instagram feed, I'm seeing free permaculture classes. You're seeing webinars, you're seeing all of this kind of groundswell of information starting to be shared where otherwise maybe it wouldn't have.
No, it's fantastic. So tell us just a little bit. You've got 3 books out already. How impressive!
Two,
is that?
only two.
Two. Why did I think you had?
There's
well,
one.
two is still
there's
very.
One in the pipeline. So.
Okay, well there you go. I must have known. I thought anyway. 2 is absolutely impressive. So tell me. So the 2 books. Tell us about the 2 books and like where can people get them from and.
Sure. So they're I'm not as sure of how maybe Australians can reach the book, but it is on Amazon. It's on our Stone Pure Press website. It's also distributed through Chelsea Green Publishing. So those are some outlets to get them. I have a copy of each right here if you guys want to look at them. So there's Growing Perennial Foods and Growing Good Foods. And they're kind of a companion guide. They kind of work off of each other, although you can read them as standalone as well.
So tell me about what's in the Growing Good Food book? I can imagine what's in the growing perennial food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the growing good food, as you can kind of tell by the cover, it's a little bit reminiscent of the old Victory Garden World War II posters. It's kind of the style it was designed in. And that's much more of a call to action. The first book, it had a lot of the same sentiments and, soil building regenerative principles that are in the second book. But the second book is more an outright call to action, trying to arm our citizen gardeners with trowels and the like.
Yeah. Fantastic. And, we can put all the links down below. So for anyone who's watching this, we'll make sure that we have all the information about Acadia's work and also all of her references to where you can get the books here in Australia.
I will do some digging too if there's better links too. I didn't quite think of the global distance.
Yeah, well, actually, people who'll be watching this too do join in from around the world, and actually, probably half of the audience is from America as well. So I'm sure that whatever you send in terms of links will be really relevant to that.
Perfect.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think as a climate activist and a small farmer, this is kind of the moment we've been waiting for. And I think it's time for all of us to really rally and encourage as many people as we can to offer the advice that we have, to give away free plants, to share seeds, to just, any little thing that you can do to kind of spread this enthusiasm, it will be worth it in spades. All it takes is that little spark to get somebody going. And once they have that spark, they can kind of nurture it into, their own flame, so to speak, not to sound corny.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It makes so much sense. And to also, I think, to really ripple out this idea of the climate victory garden, because it taps deep into something cultural for us, doesn't it? That, it's something that's been there before, and we saw the impact that it had and the difference that it made, and that it's something tangible in this time of upheaval that it's tangible and local and personal that we can do and make a meaningful contribution. And I think it's a really powerful thing that we can work on. That's not just about the virus either, because it's
right. It's bigger than all of us. It's bigger than the virus. One of the things that I've had the most questions about, or the most comments about too, is people saying, well, every time I buy a plant, I kill it. I can't grow food. And I just want to reassure everybody that you absolutely can. You're going to end up killing a few plants, but that's okay. That's part of the process. Keep trying. I don't like people, people get so frustrated that, their garden's not perfect, or their garden might have weeds, or the groundhog might have came and eaten half their carrots. But that's not the point. The point isn't to have a perfect garden. The point is to grow food for you and your family, to help fight climate change, and to, increase your personal food security.
Yeah. And like one of the things that I always tell people when they say that too is, start with the soil. Think about the fact that you're feeding the soil, not the plants. And the more that you think about feeding the soil, and you're building up the soil ecology, and you're building up the soil fertility, then the plants will just kind of take care of themselves quite often.
Absolutely. That's great advice. I tell people that all the time. If you have healthy soil, you'll have healthy plants, and your job will just be that much easier.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing the third book when it comes out. Gosh, how do you manage that? You're farming and you're writing. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Yeah.
It's a juggling act.
Do you have a right? Sorry, I'm starting up another conversation, even though I've said thank you and goodbye. But from a writer's perspective, do you have a routine, or do you just have like blocks in your life where you do it, or do you do a little bit every day, or how do the books emerge out of you as an author?
It's more like setting aside blocks of time and getting as much done within those blocks of time as humanly possible, which can be a little frustrating because sometimes it's so easy. It's so easy to write. And then other times it's the hardest, most excruciating thing you can think about. But I just have to push through it because I don't get to wake up in the morning and decide, oh, I'm going to spend a few hours doing this. It's, I have to fit it in wherever it can fit and be as productive as I can in that moment. So it definitely was, I love it. And sometimes I hate it.
Is it a seasonal thing? Do you have some like down times in your growing time?
I do. The winter is a lot more low key than this time of year. It's everything's happening all at once. So not much writing gets done this time of year, as maybe some blog articles, some interviews are nice to do because they're, not that much effort on my part. I just have to show up.
Yeah. Fantastic. And so do you write articles as well, or mostly the blog and the books? Like
I do articles as well. They usually tend to be adapted from the book.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining me today and talking about climate gardens and all the work that you're doing. It's absolutely amazing, and I really look forward to hearing more about how the climate victory gardens evolve, not just in your part of the world, but all around the world. And I'll definitely be promoting them here too, because I think it's just such a brilliant idea. And particularly now, I think, as you said, it's an opportunity to really help people, because I know that it's something that everyone's trying to do, aren't they? It's the same like you, that the seeds have run off the shelves. There's no seeds, there's no seedlings, there's no fruit trees, there's no chickens. I was just checking in the local farm store recently just to see what they were doing with chickens. They said, it's about a 9-week wait if you want chickens so far. So everything, everything's just on hold. So there is a massive upsurge in people wanting to garden. And
well, thank you for having me and, letting me help spread some of that knowledge around.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. All right, take care. Bye.
So thanks for tuning in to the Sense Making in a Changing World podcast today. It's been a real pleasure to have your company. I invite you to subscribe and receive notification of each new weekly episode with more wonderful stories, ideas, inspiration, and common sense for living and working regeneratively, and call positive permaculture thinking and design into action in this changing world. I'm including a transcript below and a link also to my 4-part permaculture series, really looking at what is permaculture and how to make it your livelihood too. So join me again in the next episode where we talk with another fascinating guest. I look forward to seeing you there.